The river had been running high that evening, swollen from a week of relentless rain that turned the countryside into a patchwork of mud and rushing water. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving streaks of orange and violet across the sky, and the air carried the damp, earthy scent of the forest. He was trudging along the bank, boots sinking into the soft, sodden soil when he heard a sharp, terrified gasp that cut through the whispering of the water and the rustle of the trees. He froze, straining to listen. It came again, louder this time, carried on the wind and the sound of the river's furious current. Without thinking, he ran toward it, heart pounding, boots splashing through puddles and ankle-deep streams. The sound led him to a bend where the river curved sharply, its surface churning with the remnants of fallen branches and leaves. And there she was. She was half submerged, clinging desperately to a jagged branch that jutted out from the bank like a claw. Her hair, dark and plastered to her face, made it hard to see the terror in her eyes, but he could feel it radiating from her like heat. The water pulled at her relentlessly, trying to drag her under, and he knew every second counted. Without a word, he plunged in, the icy water biting at his legs and chest, and reached for her. His hands grabbed hold of her coat, dragging her toward the shore. She struggled, not against him, but against the river, writhing as if it had a mind of its own, as if it knew this was the moment it could swallow her whole. With a grunt, he hauled her from the water, collapsing onto the muddy bank, gasping for breath himself. "Gosh," she coughed, spluttering and shivering, and he pulled his coat around her, wrapping it tight. For a moment, they just lay there, the river roaring past, and the forest silent, except for the rush of water. He looked down at her, soaked to the bone, and for the first time noticed the dirt streaked across her face, the cuts and bruises that marred her arms. Something in the way she stared at him, wide-eyed but unafraid, made his chest tighten. He had saved her life, yes, but there was something in her gaze that suggested the story was far from over. He had lived here all his life, knew every twist of the river, every hidden drop of the forest, every storm that could turn the peaceful water into a deadly trap. And yet, in that moment, he realized he had no idea who or what he had just pulled from the river. Something about her presence unsettled him, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made his instincts scream that things were about to change. She shivered violently, and he gently shook her shoulders, urging her to speak. "Are you all right?" His voice sounded rough, almost foreign even to himself, but she only nodded, lips trembling, eyes darting toward the trees behind them. He followed her gaze and saw nothing but shadowed branches and the fading light, but the unease didn't leave him. It was as if the forest itself were watching, waiting. You shouldn't have come here," she whispered finally, her voice soft, yet firm, carrying a strange accent that hinted at somewhere far from this quiet town. He frowned. Most people around these parts spoke slow, plain words, the kind that felt rooted in the soil. But she spoke like the wind had carried her from another place entirely, brushing past the hills and forests to reach him. "I heard you," he said simply. "I couldn't just leave you there." She looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring his soul, and for a fleeting moment, he felt exposed in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "You don't know what's waiting for me," she said, her voice tight with fear, yet something in it suggested a resilience that surprised him. Most people wouldn't have survived the river on their own. Most would have panicked, lost, but not her. She had fought the current, clinging, struggling, and now, somehow, she was alive. He helped her to her feet, and as she leaned heavily on him, she winced, a sharp breath escaping her lips. "We should move," she said urgently, eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. "They're coming." His brow furrowed. "Who's coming?" "There's nothing out here but trees and water." She shook her head, gripping his arm. "Oh, they'll find us if we stay. We need to keep moving." And just like that, the river that had seemed so threatening a few minutes ago became almost irrelevant compared to the storm of fear and urgency in her eyes. He had pulled her from the river, yes, but she had pulled something else into his life, something raw and unexplainable. And he could feel that whatever waited ahead wouldn't be as simple as mud and water. They started walking along the riverbank, his hand firm on her shoulder, guiding her through the slick terrain. The mud clung to their boots, the forest closed in around them, and with every step the tension grew, wrapping around them like a living thing. Occasionally, she would glance back over her shoulder, and he could see the flicker of shadows among the trees, though whether they were real or just his imagination, he didn't know. The sky darkened quickly, stars barely visible through the thickening clouds, and the wind picked up, sending a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He wanted to ask her where they were going, why someone or something was after her, but the words died in his throat. There was a sense of urgency in her silence, a warning that he couldn't ignore. She stumbled slightly, and he caught her, pulling her close enough to whisper, "I've got you. You're safe with me." Her gaze met his then, and it struck him. The look wasn't of fear anymore, but something sharper, more knowing. It was as if, despite the river and the danger, she had already decided that she would survive. No matter what it took, somehow, she was ready to make sure he did too. For hours or maybe only minutes, he couldn't tell, the forest pressed in around them. The river roared behind like a distant warning. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made him flinch, but she moved with a quiet determination, pulling him along as much as he guided her. And with each step, the weight of the unknown pressed heavier on his shoulders. He had always thought of himself as a protector, a man who could face the harshness of the land and the whims of nature. But in her presence he realized he was just as unprepared for what was coming as she was. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, and she pressed herself against a tree, breathing heavily. The river was behind them now, distant but still audible, and the forest stretched endlessly ahead. She finally spoke, voice low and urgent. "You think you saved me back there, but the truth is I'm the one who's going to save you in the end." He stared at her, disbelief and curiosity battling within him. The wind carried her words away almost as soon as they were spoken, leaving him with nothing but the echo of their meaning and a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. For the first time in his life, he realized he was no longer just a man wandering along a riverbank. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous, something wild than the river, the forest. The storm itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next move. He wanted to ask her how, why, or what she meant, but before he could, the sound came again, low, deliberate rustling from the edge of the trees. Not the wind, not an animal, something else, something watching. She tightened her grip on his arm, eyes scanning the shadows, and whispered, "They're closer than you think." And in that moment, he understood pulling her from the river had been only the beginning. Whatever awaited them in the dark of the forest was going to test everything he thought he knew about survival, courage, and trust. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. But even as he did, he felt a strange, unsettling hope that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face it alone. Because the girl he had saved might be the only thing strong enough to save him in return. The rustling in the trees didn't stop, shifted, faint but deliberate, like someone or something was moving with purpose. He tightened his grip on the girl's arm, feeling the tension radiate from her as if they were connected by the same unspoken fear. For a moment, the forest seemed alive, the shadows stretching and twisting with a hunger he couldn't name. The river behind them had faded into a murmur, but the chill in the air reminded him that danger didn't only come from water. It came from what lurked unseen, from what had followed her before he ever arrived. She pressed herself closer to him, whispering, "We can't stay here. It's too open. They'll see us." Her voice carried authority, a confidence that contradicted the terror in her eyes. She started moving again, careful but fast, leading him along a narrow path hidden by thick underbrush. Mud clung to their boots, their clothes sticking to skin slick with sweat and river water. Every step was deliberate, calculated, as if the ground itself might betray them. "Who are they?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to sound as panicked as he felt. The truth was, he had seen enough oddities in the wilderness to know when something wasn't right. But this felt different. He'd never faced anyone or anything that moved with such silent purpose. "They're not people you'll recognize," she said, her gaze fixed ahead. Her fingers tightened around his arm, nails biting into his skin, but it was the kind of grip that demanded trust rather than begged for help. "They've been hunting me for longer than you can imagine. I wasn't supposed to survive today. That river should have finished me." He glanced at her, startled. The words hinted at a past filled with shadows and secrets, of dangers he could barely picture. There was a story here, one he could feel pressing against the edges of his mind like smoke curling through a doorway. Why were they after you?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The forest around them seemed to swallow the sound. She shook her head quickly. I can't explain it now. Not yet. You need to keep moving. Her eyes flicked to the tree line again, alert, calculating. There's a place not far from here. It's old, abandoned. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to rest. To figure out what comes next? He followed her silently, trying to match her pace through the tangled undergrowth. The shadows seemed to stretch with them, following, echoing every movement. Every now and then, a branch snapped underfoot, sending a jolt through him. He wanted to ask her more, but her presence alone made it clear she couldn't be questioned yet. There was a rhythm to her steps, a knowledge of the land that he lacked, and he realized she had survived in places he wouldn't have dared. She had fought the river and the wilderness alike, and if she was saying they could find safety somewhere hidden, he had no choice but to trust her. As they moved, he noticed subtle signs of age in the forest. Crumbling stone foundations hidden beneath ivy, moss-covered fences that had long since fallen, and a few scattered tools left behind as if their owners had vanished one day and never returned. The girl glanced at them briefly and nodded, almost imperceptibly. This land has always been full of secrets, she said. People used to live here, hide here. Things happened here that no one talks about anymore. He tried to keep up, listening to her carefully chosen words. Something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying. He had spent his life in these hills, knew the rivers and woods better than most, yet here was a part of the forest he had never seen. There was a hidden history in the shadows, in the way the trees bent and the land shifted underfoot, and he felt the weight of it pressing against him. The clearing they finally reached was small but sheltered. Trees arched overhead like cathedral walls, branches tangled to form a natural roof. In the center lay the remnants of a cabin, long abandoned and overgrown. Its walls were blackened from weather, the roof half collapsed, and the doorway gaped like an empty eye socket. To the girl, it seemed familiar, welcoming even. She moved inside cautiously, motioning for him to follow. Once inside, she pressed herself against the wall, shaking slightly. He took a moment to look around, noting the scattered debris, broken chairs, empty jars, fragments of books. Dust hung in the air, catching the fading light, and the silence felt almost sacred. Yet beneath it all was a tension, an unspoken warning that danger could enter this sanctuary at any moment. He asked finally, breaking the quiet. His voice sounded rough, even to him, but she didn't flinch. I didn't have a choice, she said softly, looking down at her hands. But I need to know you can survive what's coming, the river. It saved you for me once. Now, I have to make sure you live to see the end of this. Her words sent a chill down his spine. He wanted to ask what she meant by the end of this, but she didn't give him the chance. She moved to the edge of the broken cabin, peering out into the trees. They can track us by more than sight or sound, she whispered. They know the land better than anyone. They can follow footprints, smell fear, sense hesitation. We can't stop moving for too long. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how exposed they were, how much they had relied on instinct and luck, just to reach this temporary haven. And yet, despite everything, the river, the storm, the shadows that seemed to follow them, he felt an odd sense of connection. She had pulled him into this wild, tangled web of danger. But she had also given him purpose, a reason to fight alongside her instead of running blindly through the night. She turned toward him, eyes catching the faint moonlight. There's more you need to understand, she said. I didn't come from here. I was sent away, hidden, because what I know. It's dangerous, and if they catch me, they won't just kill me. They'll take what I carry, and then no one will ever be safe again. He frowned, confused. What do you mean, what you carry? She shook her head, frustration flickering across her features. I can't explain everything, not yet, but I will when the time is right. For now, you need to know that nothing out there is like anything you've faced. The river was only the beginning. The forest, the hills, they're hiding more than just shadows. They're hiding secrets that could change everything. He stared at her, trying to piece together the fragments of her story, the hints of danger, and the strange way she spoke, as if she had lived 100 lives before this one. Every word, every glance, every movement carried weight. She wasn't just a girl who had fallen into a river. She was a force, and he was suddenly part of her world, a world that seemed to pulse with danger, mystery, and a promise of trials that would test him like never before. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing through the broken windows and rattling the old wooden boards. He could hear it whispering through the trees, carrying the faintest echoes of movement, faint rustling that set his nerves on edge. Something or someone was out there, and they weren't far behind. She leaned closer to him, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I can keep you alive. I can keep us both alive. But only if you follow me exactly. No hesitation, no doubt. Can you do that?" He nodded, even though a part of him feared he wouldn't be enough. But he couldn't let her face whatever this was alone. Not after the river. Not after everything he had seen and felt in the last few hours. "Good," she said, voice steady, almost cold now. "Then we move again before dawn. The first light is when they hunt best. Shadows of the forest will hide us if we stay careful, but we can't linger. We have to reach the ridge by sunrise, and from there—" She trailed off, glancing toward the open doorway, where the night pressed in like a living wall. The forest was waiting. The river had done its part, but the wild had more in store. And as they readied themselves to step back into the darkness, he realized that every choice, every step, every heartbeat could decide who survived and who vanished into the shadows forever. He didn't yet know what she carried or why they were hunted. But one thing was certain: the night was far from over, and the river had only been the first test of a story that was far wilder than he could imagine. Dawn had not yet broken when they left the broken cabin, stepping carefully into the chill of the early morning. The forest was quiet, but the quiet had weight. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf seemed amplified, a warning of the presence they could not see. He followed her closely, boots sinking into the damp earth, and for the first time, he tried to take in her movements, how she seemed to know where the ground might give way, where roots and rocks would betray a misstep. There was a history here, he realized, one that stretched far beyond his own lifetime in these hills. "Why haven't you gone to anyone for help?" he asked quietly, trying to keep his voice from carrying too far. "Surely there's someone in the town who could, protect you." She glanced at him, expression unreadable, eyes sharp and alert. Anyone in town could be watched. Anyone could be part of it. She hesitated, then added, "Sometimes the people who help you most are the ones you least expect, and sometimes they're the ones who put you in danger first." Her words left him unsettled, a chill creeping up his spine. There was more to her story than she had told. Layers hidden under the surface of her voice, in the way she scanned the forest, in the urgency of her steps. He had thought the river had been the immediate danger, but now he saw it had been only the start. The real threat was still waiting, and it was patient, methodical, and unseen. They moved along a narrow ridge that overlooked the river valley, the mist still clinging to the lowlands like a thick blanket. From this height, he could see the forest stretching endlessly, hills rising and falling like waves frozen in time. He realized that the landscape he had known all his life held secrets he could never have imagined. And somewhere out there, she suggested, those secrets were alive, tracking them, watching. "I need to know," he said finally, "what it is they want from you. What makes you worth hunting?" She shook her head, keeping her gaze ahead. "I can't tell you that yet. You'd be in more danger if I did." Her voice held no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a quiet intensity that made him trust her, even as his mind screamed at him not to. "All you need to know is that it's not about money or land or revenge. It's older than that, more dangerous. And it has been following me for as long as I can remember." He tried to imagine the kind of danger that could shadow someone like this, that could hunt her through forests and rivers, through the night and the mud. The stories he had heard in the town of men going missing, of strange happenings in the hills, suddenly seemed connected to her presence here. Was it coincidence, or had he stumbled into something much larger than himself, something that had been unfolding long before he arrived? They reached a small clearing where a fallen log offered a temporary resting place. She dropped to it without hesitation, her coat still wet, hair plastered to her face, eyes scanning the horizon. He stood beside her, heart still racing, and tried to study her face in the dim light. There were traces of exhaustion, yes, but also determination and almost reckless bravery that suggested she had survived far worse than the river. "You've been running for a long time, haven't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," she admitted, voice low. Not just today, not just from the river, from before I even remember. There are things that haunt me, people I can't trust, places I can't go. And every now and then, they catch up, and I barely escape. Her words painted a picture he could barely comprehend. It wasn't just survival, it was a life lived on the edge, constantly moving, constantly hiding. And somehow, he had been pulled into it, not just as a witness, but as part of the story itself. He wanted to ask about her past, about who she was before all this, but he sensed she wouldn't answer not yet. Instead, she shifted, drawing a small satchel from under her coat, checking its contents with swift, practiced movements. We'll need supplies soon, she said. Food, firewood, something to keep the night at bay, but we can't linger too long. They'll be near before midday. The thought made him glance around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were, even here on the ridge. The forest below seemed quiet, almost deceptively so, but he could feel the tension like a living thing, brushing against the backs of his neck. He wanted to see them, to understand the threat, but she had made it clear that knowledge could be deadly. The unknown was a weapon, and she had learned to wield it better than anyone he had ever met. As they prepared to move again, a sudden rustle came from behind a nearby thicket. Both of them froze. The sound was deliberate, calculated, and it set his nerves on edge. His hand instinctively went to the handle of the knife he kept at his belt, but she laid a steadying hand on his arm. Wait, she whispered, voice tense but controlled. Watch the shadows, not the movement, and don't let them know we are aware. He did as she instructed, heart pounding in his chest. The rustle grew louder for a moment, then stopped, as if whatever it was had decided to wait. He realized then that this chase was not just about speed or distance. It was about strategy, about understanding the forest, the wind, the way the world could hide threats in plain sight. And she knew it all. They moved on, slower now, careful. Stepping through patches of mud and broken branches, the ridge sloping down into a thicker part of the forest. He noticed small sign marks on tree bark, trampled undergrowth, hints that someone or something had passed through here not long before. She noticed them too, pausing at each sign, eyes sharp, expression calculating. They're clever, she murmured. They've been tracking me for years. Not just through the forest, but through towns, roads, even rivers. They know the land, they know the patterns, and they adapt. Every time I think I'm safe, they've learned something new. He swallowed, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what they were facing. This wasn't just a random threat, it was relentless, intelligent, and patient. The river had been a trial, the ridge another, and whatever came next would test them even further. He realized that surviving wasn't enough. They would have to outthink, outmaneuver, and perhaps even outlast something that had been hunting her far longer than he had been alive. She paused at a fork in the path, scanning both directions. We can go left, risk the open fields, but move faster, she said, voice low, or right through the ravine, slower but more cover. Which do you choose? He hesitated, but she shook her head. Don't decide for me. I'll need to learn how to see through the forest the way I do. Every choice counts. He nodded, swallowing his fear. He realized that she wasn't just leading him. She was teaching him, shaping him into someone who could survive alongside her. And for the first time, he understood that the river had not only saved her, but had begun to draw him into a life far beyond the ordinary. They moved right into the ravine, the trees closing overhead like a natural tunnel. Sunlight barely touched the ground, and the damp smell of earth and moss filled the air. The shadows seemed to stretch and sway, and every sound echoed like a warning. He stayed close, following her steps, trusting her instincts, even as he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in around them. Do you ever rest? He asked quietly. Sometimes, she said without looking back, but never long enough for them to catch me. Resting is dangerous. Being still is dangerous. The moment you think you're safe is the moment you're not. Her words made him shiver, not from the cold, but from the understanding that their journey was only beginning. The river, the forest, the shadow soul of it was part of a larger story, one that was far from over. And he realized that he had been pulled into a world where survival depended not only on strength, but on instinct, trust, and the courage to face what he couldn't see. They pressed on, deeper into the ravine. Each step a careful calculation, each glance over the shoulder a reminder that the hunt was relentless. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive with possibilities, and somewhere beyond the trees. The threat waited, patient and knowing. He glanced at her, and for a brief moment, he saw something in her eyes, a spark of hope, a hint of a plan, a promise that she would do whatever it took to keep him alive. And he understood that pulling her from the river had been only the first act. The real story, the true test of courage and survival, was only beginning. The wind shifted again, carrying faint whispers through the trees. They didn't understand the words, didn't need to. The forest itself was speaking, warning, reminding them that the wild was alive, that danger was always near, and that the river was only the start of what they had to endure. And in that moment, he realized that nothing would ever be the same. The forest thickened as they pressed deeper into the ravine, shadows folding over them like dark waves. Each step was calculated, each movement silent, but the tension in the air was palpable, almost visible. Curling around their shoulders and making the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The girl moved with purpose, silent and swift, yet he noticed her breathing had grown shallow, her shoulders tight with controlled effort. She wasn't panicking, but he could feel the weight of what she carried pressing down on her, even if she tried to hide it. "They're close," she whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness between the trees. "Closer than we thought." "We've lost too much time already," he swallowed hard, heart hammering. Every shadow seemed to twist into a figure, every rustle a warning. The forest itself felt alive, alert, and hostile, as if it were conspiring with whoever or whatever was hunting her. He had spent years in these hills, knew every bend of the river and every hidden trail, yet now every familiar landmark seemed treacherous, every sound a signal of unseen danger. As they moved, she paused at a narrow ledge overlooking a small ravine, where the river below roared like a silver snake, carving its way through the forest. She crouched, pointing silently, and he followed her gaze. In the distance, among the mist and trees, faint movement caught the corner of his eye figures, moving deliberately, almost gliding over the uneven ground. They weren't rushing, but they weren't hiding either. Presence was confident, patient, and chilling. "They know where we are," she said, her voice barely audible. "They've always known." He felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He had expected danger to be immediate, raw, and chaotic, like the river, but this was something patient, something calculated. The river had been violent, uncontrolled, but these hunters, these shadows, moved with purpose. And for the first time, he realized he didn't know the rules of this game. "We need to move," she said, gripping his arm with sudden urgency. "Down into the ravine. There's a hidden path along the bank. It's treacherous, but it's our best chance to stay ahead." The descent was slow and dangerous, roots slick with moisture, and loose rocks threatening to send them tumbling. He followed her closely, boots slipping on the mud, heart hammering with each step. Every sound, the splash of water, the crack of a branch, the whisper of wind through leaves felt magnified, as though the forest itself was amplifying the tension. Once they reached the riverbank, she paused, glancing upstream. "We can't cross yet," she said, "too exposed. They'll see us if we try. But there's a bend ahead, a shallow ford. If we can reach it without being spotted?" He nodded, understanding. The river that had almost taken her life hours before now offered a path, but it was a dangerous one, requiring stealth and precision. Every step felt like a gamble, and the shadows along the bank seemed to lean closer, curious and patient, as if testing them. As they moved along the river's edge, he caught a glimpse of something unexpected. A figure crouched atop a rock further downstream, watching, waiting. He tensed, but she put a finger to his lips, shaking her head. "Don't give them reason to notice us," she whispered. They pressed on, silent and tense, the mist swirling around them, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. His lungs burned from the effort, his muscles screamed from climbing and slipping, but he kept pace, drawn forward by the need to survive and protect her. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary pursuit. These weren't ordinary hunters. They moved with purpose, intelligence, and patience, and every decision he made could tip the balance between life and death. The shallow ford finally appeared, the water sparkling faintly in the dim light, deceptively calm. She scanned the opposite bank, then whispered, "Now, move quickly." But carefully, they stepped into the river, the cold water biting at their legs, swirling around boots and ankles like invisible fingers trying to pull them under. We focused on the path she traced, careful not to stumble, careful not to make a sound that would betray their presence. Behind them, the faint movement of shadows hinted that they were still being watched, still being followed, still being hunted. Halfway across, a sudden splash upstream made them freeze. He saw the water churn violently, a figure emerging, breaking through the mist with terrifying speed. She reacted instantly, grabbing his arm and pulling him into the shallows, pressing against the bank as if the river itself would shield them. "They're faster than we thought," she hissed. Her eyes scanned the water, sharp and calculating, as though reading the currents for hidden dangers. "Don't make a sound. Don't move unless I tell you." He nodded, heart pounding, sweat mixing with the river water on his face. The figure upstream seemed to hesitate for only a moment, then continued moving along the bank, carefully keeping the water between them. He realized then that this wasn't just a chase, they were being tested, measured, every reaction observed. She led him quickly out of the river and into a narrow channel where thick roots and fallen trees provided cover. They crouched low, breathing shallowly, listening to the distant movements behind them. Every sound was a signal, every shadow a potential threat. He tried to steady his mind, tried to remember everything she had taught him so far. Trust your instincts, read the forest, anticipate the unknown. But even with her guidance, the fear pressed in, relentless and unyielding. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The forest grew denser, the river fading behind them, replaced by tangled undergrowth and the sharp scent of wet leaves. Every step forward was a negotiation with the land itself, a test of endurance and attention. And through it all, she moved like a force of nature, confident and precise, leading him deeper into the unknown. At one point, they paused in a small clearing where the forest opened to a low plateau. The sun was rising now, casting pale light through the mist, and he could finally see the expanse of the hills beyond. But even in the daylight, the tension did not lift. He could feel eyes on them, even if no one was visible. The air seemed charged, expectant, like the calm before a storm. She knelt beside him, examining the ground. "We're close," she whispered. "The place I told you about. It's just ahead. But we can't rush. They'll expect that." He studied her, noticing for the first time the fine tremor in her hands, the tight set of her jaw. She had survived so much, endured so many dangers, yet there was a fragility beneath the determination. He realized then that what she carried, whatever it was heavier than he could imagine, and that the stakes were higher than survival alone. Suddenly, a sound shattered the tense silence. A twig snapped sharply behind them, followed by a soft rustling. He froze, instinctively moving in front of her, knife drawn. She pressed a hand to his shoulder, shaking her head. "Wait," she hissed. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows, calculating, reading movements invisible to him. The rustling grew closer, deliberate, controlled. Then, a low, guttural sound echoed through the trees. A warning, a threat. He realized with a chill that whatever hunted them was not human, or at least not entirely so. The forest itself seemed to respond, the branches quivering as if alive, and the river's roar from hours before felt like a distant echo of the danger now surrounding them. She whispered quickly, "Follow me. Keep your eyes on mine. Trust every step." They moved again, faster now, slipping through undergrowth and over roots, the plateau giving way to steeper ground. Every muscle burned, every breath was heavy, but he matched her pace, driven by fear, instinct, and the need to survive. The shadows behind them lengthened, moving with a patience that made his skin crawl. Finally, they reached the edge of a deep ravine, the hidden place she had promised. Stone walls rose on either side, moss-covered and ancient, creating a natural fortress. She pressed him against the wall, eyes scanning, and then whispered, "We're here. For now, but we can't stay. They'll find us, and soon." He looked at her, trying to understand the weight of what she carried, the relentless pursuit, the danger that had shadowed her life for so long. He realized then that pulling her from the river had been only the first step in a story far larger than either of them, a story that would test courage, trust, and survival to the limit. The wind rustled through the ravine, carrying whispers and faint movements. They crouched together, hearts pounding, aware that every second counted. The chase, the hunt, the relentless shadows, it had all led here, to the edge of something monumental. And as they prepared to face whatever came next, he understood one undeniable truth. The climax of their struggle was only moments away. And the river, the forest, the wild all of it, had been guiding them to this point. To a confrontation that could change everything. The shadows shifted, moving closer. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of movement, deliberate and precise, told them the end of the hunt was near. The shadows pressed closer, moving silently along the edges of the ravine, but she did not flinch. Instead, she drew a deep breath and stepped forward, pulling him with her eyes locked on the unseen threat. He followed, heart hammering, muscles tense, but the fear that had been his constant companion all day began to shift into something sharper focus, a clarity born from trusting her guidance completely. "They've been chasing me for years," she whispered, voice steady, though her eyes burned with intensity. "Not because of who I am, but because of what I carry. It's knowledge, a kind of understanding they think they can use. But they've underestimated me every step of the way." He watched her carefully, noticing the strength in her posture, the way her fingers moved with precision as she navigated the rocky terrain. The forest seemed to respond to her presence, the wind shifting in subtle ways, almost as if it recognized her command over the land. He realized then that the danger was not just in the shadows. They were confronting something ancient, something that had always lingered at the edge of the world he thought he knew. As they moved forward, the figures in the shadows began to emerge more clearly. They were not human, not entirely. Their movements were fluid, almost inhuman, their eyes glinting in the dim light, reflecting the pale sun creeping over the ridges. He froze, realizing with a chill that the tales he had heard as a boy about the forest's wild secrets were true. "I need you to stay behind me. Trust me, everything depends on the next few minutes." They pressed onward, and the creatures advanced with them, never breaking the distance, testing, circling, like predators, learning their prey. The river's roar from hours earlier seemed distant now, replaced by the quiet hum of tension. He kept close to her, every sense alert, knowing that one mistake could undo all they had survived. Then, in the heart of the ravine, she stopped. Before them lay an ancient stone circle, partially overgrown, weathered by time, yet radiating a presence that was impossible to ignore. Closing her eyes and chanting softly in a language he did not recognize, the creatures halted, hesitant, as if bound by something older than themselves, something she had called forth.
What is this?"
he whispered. "It's the place I was told about when I was very young," she said, eyes still closed. "The place that can keep me safe. If I use it right, if I draw on what I've learned, if I stay strong." He watched, heart pounding, as the creatures lingered at the edges, unsure, restrained. She opened her eyes and looked at him, a fierce determination shining through the exhaustion. "You've helped me survive the river, the forest, the hunt. Now, stay with me, watch closely, and trust me, no matter what happens." The creatures advanced again, but she raised her hands, chanting louder now, voice echoing against the stones, the forest, and the ridges. There was a flash of light, subtle at first, then stronger, a pulse that ran through the ground and up into their bones. The creatures hesitated, growls rumbling low, but they could not cross the boundary she had drawn. He felt a strange warmth in the air, the tension in his chest easing slightly, yet the fear remained. This was not a victory, it was a turning point. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, as if the land itself acknowledged her command over it. She turned to him, nodding. "We're not free yet, but they can't touch us here. Not while we hold the circle." For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to take in the forest, the stones, the raw power she seemed to command. And yet here, on the edge of danger, he saw her true strength. She had survived not by chance, but by courage, intelligence, and the knowledge she had carried all her life. "Tell me," he said softly, voice still rough from hours of exertion, "why me? Why did the river? Did I have to be the one to find you?" She smiled faintly, a shadow of exhaustion behind it. Because you helped me see that survival isn't just about hiding, it's about trust, courage, and sometimes even the river itself chooses who will carry us through the darkness. You saved me without knowing it, and in turn, I can save you. That's why you were there. He nodded, understanding in a way he hadn't before. The hunt, the forest, the river, the shadows, they had all tested them. But it was their trust, their courage, and their choices that would define the outcome. The creatures lingered at the edge of the stone circle, growling and shifting, but she remained steadfast. Hours seemed to pass, though he could not tell, as the light shifted and the forest remained silent around them. Finally, she lowered her hands, stepping away from the stone circle, turning to him with a look of quiet triumph. "They won't come near us while the circle holds," she said. "Not today, not while we are here." The hunt was not over, he realized, but they had survived the moment of greatest danger. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw more than the girl who had fallen into the river. He saw a survivor, a fighter, a force of nature who had carried knowledge, fear, and strength all her life, and had pulled him into a story far larger than he had ever imagined. She packed her small satchel, checking it with methodical care, then looked at him. "We should move on soon," she said. "The forest will hold them for a while, but it won't protect us forever. We need to leave before nightfall. There's more ahead, more we need to understand." He nodded, ready now to follow her, not out of obligation, but because he trusted her instinct and her strength. The forest, the river, the shadows, they had all been tests. And while the climax of the hunt had passed, the story of their survival, the knowledge she carried, the bond forged in fear and trust was only beginning to shape their lives. As they moved through the forest, the sun climbing higher, he thought back to the river, to the moment he had pulled her from the water, never knowing she would one day save him in return. Every step now felt deliberate, purposeful, a rhythm of trust and courage. He realized that the wild, the unknown, the fear that had pressed down on them for so long had also brought clarity, understanding, and an unspoken promise that survival was not just about escaping danger, but about finding strength in the unexpected and learning who you can trust. Hours later, they emerged from the thick forest into a sunlit valley. The river winding lazily through the land, peaceful now, almost as if it had forgiven them for the chaos of the night before. She stopped and looked at him, face softening, a faint smile breaking through the fatigue. "You survived," she said simply. "So did you," he replied, voice still rough but firm. She nodded, and together they stood in silence for a moment, listening to the quiet, the wind, the distant calls of birds. The forest behind them seemed calmer now, the shadows receding into their own corners. No longer immediate threats, but reminders of the trials they had faced and the strength they had discovered. "You know," she said finally, "the river didn't just save me. It brought you here, and somehow it made sure we would find each other. You have to remember that. Courage isn't just about fighting. It's about understanding, trusting, and being willing to step into the unknown." He looked at her, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of peace. The hunt was over, for now. The shadows had receded, the forest seemed almost gentle. The river, once a force of fear, now felt like a lifeline, a reminder that sometimes survival depended on more than just strength, depended on courage, trust, and the unexpected ways that people could save each other. They walked together toward the riverbank, boots sinking into soft mud, the sunlight glinting on the water, and he realized that the wild, the unknown, the danger, they had all brought him here, to this moment of understanding. She had saved him once, yes, but in the end, survival had been a shared journey, one that had revealed the depth of human resilience, the power of trust, and the way courage could shape even the darkest hours. As the sun climbed fully above the hills, they paused at the river's edge. She looked out over the water, a small smile on her face, then turned to him. "This isn't the end," she said. "But we've made it this far. That's worth everything." He nodded, understanding. The river, the forest, the shadows, they had tested them, challenged them, but ultimately they had endured. And as they began to follow the river downstream together, he realized that sometimes the greatest lessons of survival came not from fighting the wild, but from learning to trust, to follow, and to face the unknown with someone beside you. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of new paths, new challenges, the quiet reassurance that whatever came next, they would face it together. And as they walked on, the river flowing beside them, he finally understood the truth. Saving her had been only the beginning, and being saved in return was the gift he would carry for the rest of his life.